Our coastlines, that amazing place where the land meets the sea, they hold this incredibly powerful, but also super fragile solution to climate change. So let's get into it. We're talking about tidal wetlands and how a really detailed official rulebook is turning these amazing ecosystems into a real, verifiable weapon in the fight against climate change.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. You've got groups like Restore America's Estuaries, who actually helped develop the science we're about to talk about, who are literally on the ground pioneering the methods to bring these habitats back from the brink.
So, what's the big deal with wetlands anyway? Well, it's because they kind of have two very different personalities. They can be one of our absolute best friends when it comes to storing carbon, or they can actually become part of the problem. And here's what that looks like. It's a pretty stark contrast, right? A healthy, happy wetland is what we call a blue carbon sink. It's like a superhero, actively sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere and locking it away in the soil for hundreds of years. But when that same wetland gets degraded, drained or damaged, it flips the script. It becomes a carbon source, releasing all that stored up carbon and even worse, methane, which is a greenhouse gas that's way more potent than CO2.
Okay, so that naturally brings us to the solution. Restoration. But this isn't just, tossing a few seeds out and hoping for the best. It's a really precise, scientific process that has a clear, agreed-upon definition.
And having this official definition is so important. It's about systematically fixing all the things that make a wetland tick. We're talking about hydrology, which is just the natural flow of water, and salinity, the salt levels. It's about restoring the water quality, making sure there's enough sediment, getting the native plants back. It's basically a complete system reboot.
And here's what that action plan looks like in the real world. We're talking concrete steps, like removing old dikes or dams to get the natural tides flowing again, or even using sediment dredged from shipping channels to rebuild land that's been washed away. It could be as simple as planting native species or managing the land differently to get rid of invasive ones. Every single step is a deliberate move to get that ecosystem working again.
But all this amazing work, it leads to a huge challenge. It's really the billion-dollar question. How do you actually pay for all this on a global scale? And how do you prove to the people footing the bill that it's actually making a real difference?
First up, the money. Where does it come from? This kind of restoration work is not cheap, and the problem is massive. We need a way to reliably finance this work everywhere it's needed.
And then there's the other side of the coin, which is all about trust. How can anyone, funders, governments, you, me, be totally 100% sure that a restored wetland is capturing the carbon we claim it is?
Well, the answer to both of those huge questions actually lies in creating a rulebook, a standardized, scientific, and globally accepted rulebook. A way to turn all this amazing ecological science into a standard that everyone can trust.
And this is where an organization called Verra comes into the picture. They run something called the Verified Carbon Standard, or VCS. Think of them as the global referees for climate action projects. They set the rules to make sure a project is real, that it's effective, and that it has real integrity.
And for the wetlands we're talking about, that rulebook has a very specific name, VM0033. This is it. This is the official, super detailed methodology for tidal wetland and seagrass restoration. It's the playbook.
Okay, so let's peek inside this rulebook. How does it actually work? How does it let us count carbon with so much confidence?
It really all comes down to this one tricky question. How on earth do you measure something that's been removed from the atmosphere? It's not like you can just weigh the sky, right?
The way they do it is actually pretty brilliant. The core idea is to compare two different scenarios. First, you have the baseline scenario. You use science to model what would have happened to that wetland if you did nothing at all. Spoiler, it probably would have kept getting worse and leaking carbon. Then you have the project scenario. You measure what actually happens once you do the restoration work. The difference between those two scenarios, that is your net climate benefit. That's the amount of carbon you can verifiably say you've saved.
And to make sure that calculation is totally rock solid, the whole system is built on some really strict principles. For instance, a project has to be additional. That's a fancy way of saying the restoration only happened because of the carbon credit funding. You also have to prevent leakage. You can't save one wetland if it just causes someone to go destroy another one down the coast. And on top of all that, it demands intense, long-term monitoring of everything, even accounting for future risks like sea level rise. These rules are what make the whole thing trustworthy.
All right, so let's tie all of this together.
Why does a dense, technical rulebook like VM0033 matter so much in the real world, for those wetlands we saw earlier?
Well, because at the end of the day, this was never just about writing a bunch of rules.
It's about creating trust. Because that trust, which is backed up by solid, verifiable science, is what allows the positive impact of a restored wetland to be converted into something real and tradable, a high-integrity verified carbon credit.
And those credits are what finally attract the investment. They create a system that channels money directly into these amazing restoration projects. It creates this incredible, positive feedback loop. The rules build trust, the trust creates the credits, and the credits unlock the funding to go save the next wetland, and the next, and the next.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. This whole process shows that it's possible to take something as complicated and messy as a coastal ecosystem, apply some really rigorous science to it, and create a trusted, financeable way to heal it. So, if we can write the rules to save a wetland, what can't we save?